I've completed the base of my armature, that main shape that's just a triangle that's three-dimensional. The next thing I want to do is look back at my plan, and I need to have some kind of an idea of what relief I want everything to be in. So on mine, I decided that I wanted the high relief part to be the porch. I wanted that to project out pretty far, the farthest out of anything. Medium relief is going to be the door and window frames. So I'm going to build those out, but not quite as big as the porch. And finally, the low relief parts will be the shingles on the roof. So the next thing I need to do, I think I'll go ahead and do the porch first because high relief is maybe going to be the trickiest. I'm going to go back to some of those scraps I chopped off of my box earlier, and I'm going to measure up against the house to see what kind of a piece I'm going to need. So it looks to me like this piece will be big enough. I'm just putting it right on top there, and I'm going to cut out a rectangle because basically when I'm putting it on there, my porch is just going to look like a small rectangular box. So I would want to cut out something that I think is close to what I want. You're kind of estimating here. Measure it up against the house where you want it to go, and you can either eyeball it, or sometimes I like to mark it so that I don't have to go back and trim. But obviously you can always go back and trim. It's not that difficult. And that looks about right for my porch. So I would want to create basically a rectangular box. Looking back at the handout that's on your table, what I need for a rectangular box down here at the bottom is 2 equal rectangles and 4 equal horizontal long skinny rectangles. So I'm going to need 4 that look like this, and I'm going to need 2 that look like this. Although since it's going to be up against the house, I might not have to have all 4. If you're not going to see all sides of the shape, sometimes you can get away with only doing 3 because the back side of that rectangle is going to be up against the house. So I'm going to cut out 3 horizontal rectangles and 2 pieces for the ends, and that's what's going to push it out from the sides of my house. So measuring off of what I had before, I can kind of line it up and either mark it or just hold it in place and cut. So that can be the bottom. You could leave it open on the top as well, so you might actually only need 2. But I'm going to go ahead and do a top because that'll make it a little bit more sturdy and less likely to fall off, which is always a bad thing. You don't want stuff falling off of your house. So I'm going to cut it. I could have traced it, but it's quicker if you just hold things in place. You want to do this carefully so you don't cut off anything you're going to need. So there are my 3 long skinny rectangles for my porch. Now I need the 2 that are going to be on the ends. So I would just measure off of what I've already got, make sure that it's the correct length, and I'll cut 1. Look and see on my house if that's about how far out I want it to project, and that looks pretty good to me. I don't want it to be too much farther than that because it might weigh down the front of the house and it might fall over, and that would be bad. So now I need a second one that's going to match. Holding it in place or tracing it, I would just cut out a second one, and then I'm going to construct it by taping the pieces together. So again, I've got all that masking tape along the side of my table. That way, as I start this, I'm not going to have to stop and tear more tape. You kind of want to keep an eye on how much you've got because it's really annoying to have to stop when you're sort of in the middle of something to tear more tape. So I'm just taping all the pieces together, and I notice right now that I've made a mistake. The rectangle on top is a little bit wider than this side of the rectangle is. So what I think I'll do is I'll actually just trim off the extra. So I'll mark it, because I can't necessarily hold it in place and cut it at the same time. I'll mark where I need to cut it, and I'll mark on the other side just to make sure. Trim off the extra. Cut my second rectangle to match because I changed the size of one. I need to make them match to each other, and that looks a lot better. If you need to tear your masking tape down the center to make smaller pieces, that's fine. Sometimes it's going to be too big for the shapes that you're creating. So just tape them in place. And I've just about got what I need to attach to the house. Okay, so now I'm ready to actually hook it on to the house. What I would want to do is put it about where I think it goes, and if I look at the other side of my handout, which gives instructions on how to join pieces together, I think instead of cutting tabs into the porch, I would rather use an L-shaped piece of tape. That just seems like a little safer since I know that everything is the perfect size already. So I'm going to tear these in half. I don't need a gigantic piece. Put a piece on the porch. I'm going to do a couple of those all the way around, just because it is a little easier to do this all at once. And then I'll put it where it belongs, and make sure that the tape is all the way down flush with the front of the house. You don't want it to be going across like this, because then you're going to have a funny gap that you have to cover, and it's going to just look kind of clunky. So, pressing down all the pieces, and it looks like I've pretty securely attached my porch in place. You want to make sure that you center it if it's supposed to be centered in your design. So next thing I would do is, I'm looking back at my plan. Medium relief things are, I want the door and the windows to have frames. What you can do is use scraps for this as well, and I would say probably the easiest thing to make the door and window frames would be cutting little skinny strips and then stack them together in a pile, just because it's not going to need to be really thick, but it'll need to be kind of thick. So I'm just going to measure them off of each other, and this one, I'm afraid that I might accidentally cut off something important, so I am actually going to trace before I cut. And I think I will go ahead and make it stacked 3 pieces of cardboard high. Creating your cardboard armature for your house does take some time, but it's also really fun to try and figure out how to troubleshoot all of the problems and how you're going to get to do what you have in your mind. Personally, I think it's a fun thing to overcome problems and see that you can figure out solutions on your own, that you don't always have to have somebody holding your hand or fixing things for you. So I just tore off some more tape because I realized I was running a little bit low, and I'm going to measure and see how tall I want my door to be, because I don't want it to run into the porch. Okay, so I'm going to tape around my little pile of cardboard all the way, and then I can measure it and cut it to fit. I don't want it to be too big, so it looks to me like if I mark it right here, I'll need 2 pieces like that that match. And notice that I cut across a piece of tape. That actually made it easier because these pieces then didn't fall apart. So I'm going to tape these ones on the end together, measure, cut. And I figure I'll make the frame out of a pile of cardboard, but the actual door itself I'll just paint on once I get to the part where I'm painting. So I'll just tape over this, and I really probably only need one piece for each of these. They're very lightweight. I just want them to stay put. Space it out a little bit so I can paint my door in there later. Making sure to smooth over the area so that it's not going to be all clunky. And now I need a rectangle that's going to fit right between those two. So I would just do the same thing, stacking up pieces of cardboard, cutting them to fit, taping them together, and then taping them down. And then I can go on to the next thing.